are you all doing? See the conversations continuing, which is great. So welcome in, everybody. Go on, how are you feeling? Who's feeling bold? Who's still feeling energised? Who is feeling that strong call to action that we had this morning? Who's still holding that? Excellent. So we've had stats, we've had stories, we've had movement, we've had sweat, we've had smiles, we've had active participation in all senses of the words, and it sounds like you've had some brilliant workshops and you've gone deep in sharing your different learning and challenges and inspiration. So I'm just gutted I couldn't be in all of them at the same time. So welcome back. I'm delighted that our next panel is pretty phenomenal. A group of leaders across Greater Manchester who are all massive advocates of GM moving. Before we go to them and I introduce our chair, Tom, we've got one more story we want to share. So this is the story of prehab for cancer. So settle into your chairs, grab your mug, and here's a brilliant story of the power of moving.
Rehabilitation is the pre-operative optimization of patients, and i.e. getting the patients ready and as fit as they can for their surgery, and that's in the form of nutrition, psychological support and exercise.
So we always compare cancer treatment and going through cancer to being a bit like a marathon, and if you were going to run a marathon you wouldn't do it without doing some training in advance. Undergoing surgery or chemo or radiotherapy is probably one of the biggest major stresses your body's going to go through. So it's about making sure that you're physically prepared for that. And it's not only about the physical side, it's actually the psychological side as well. It's understanding that people often feel very out of control when they're first diagnosed with cancer and in the run-up to treatment. And actually by coming and engaging in the programme and doing some physical activity as well as having the other interventions that we offer, it helps people to feel more in control. It helps people to be much more physically prepared, and it means that they have a much better recovery and outcomes on the other side of having their treatment.
We obviously focus on the cardiovascular side. We want to try and make sure that the heart and lungs are as strong and as healthy as they can be going into surgery. So we would, depending on the client's abilities, we would decide whether they would undertake high intensity interval workout, where we would try and do little peaks of high intensity training to try and boost their fitness as quickly as possible, or if this wasn't suitable, we're trying to do a graduated programme, making sure they're reaching at least moderate intensity activity and then go even harder. And we incorporate this with resistance exercises, focusing specifically on the upper body, obviously on the legs as well, and trying to boost that strength so that hopefully rather than hospital, any strength in that lose will be supported via the training.
I've never attended a gymnasium before, but I feel much more within myself now, and I'm sure I'm on the right road.
If I was talking to somebody who was recommended to have prehab, and they weren't sure about it, I would say definitely go for it. Definitely. Because it sets you up physically as well as mentally, and it does, you get a kind of well-being, there's a feeling of well-being as well, and you're just ready for it.
Prehab programme, obviously the fitter and the stronger the patient is, that's going to help me in my role in the post-operative recovery phase when they're in hospital, because they're not going to have had as much of a decline in their fitness and the strength as they may have had without the exercise programme. So that's going to mean we can get the patient up and moving much earlier, we can progress them much quicker, hopefully get them home and back in their own environment, to be covering their own home, ready to start the next phase of their rehabilitation.
So when the patients come into hospital, they actually come in, I see them before they have their surgery. We do something called surgery school. We mentioned prehab for cancer in that as well. Quite often some of the patients will have actually had their initial assessments, and that can be quite useful because if there are other patients that were undecided, there will be other patients there that can have that conversation. Afterwards, you can definitely tell the patients that are going through the programme, they're keen to get up and going,
and they ask me when they're going home, when they can go back to the gym, which they can't do just at the time, but they're keen, and I think that's a really good sign.
It makes you feel good in yourself for a start, and at the back of your mind you've got this feeling that anything you do has got to be helpful for enhancing your recovery, and that's got to be a good thing.
So I've got the pleasure now of handing over chair to Tom Stannard. So Tom is the Chief Exec of Salford City Council and also now the Chair of the Greater Manchester Moving Exec Group. I might actually take Sarah Story's advice, which was why sit when you could lie down? But anyway, I'm definitely going to sit for a moment and hand over to Tom and the panel who's really thinking about what does it mean to take a place-based approach for healthy, active lives. Over to you, Tom.
Eve, thank you. I do want to start just by saying a massive thank you to you and to Hayley and the whole of the GM Moving team, really. I think I'm kind of blessed by standing on the shoulders of giants, having taken over this role through, I think, what's fair to describe as a selection process amongst the 10 chief executives of Greater Manchester. If you want some insight into the smoke-filled rooms that we make our decisions in, the story goes that Steve decided he was moving on. I had been kind of amateurishly trailing him around Greater Manchester on a bike and wishing to aspire to his great achievements. Eamon Boylan said, Steve's leaving and somebody else who likes riding bikes ought to take this job on with Hayley. I rather foolishly, not through any fault of my own, was known for enjoying such pursuits. So the spotlight fell on me, but I was delighted to take it on, and I think it genuinely is, not just as far as Steve's concerned, but as far as Hayley and the team and everybody in the room, public sector, private sector, voluntary sector, who's been involved in the whole success story of GM Moving over a number of years now, are part of what we were discussing earlier is the fantastic movement that GM Moving is. And I think it's the movement that we're here to celebrate, discuss on the panel this afternoon, but it's the movement, most importantly, that I think we are here to try to sustain. And the sustainability of that is at a perilous moment, you might say, for all of our organisations. We've all got our own stories we can share of the challenges that our organisations, our parts of the business are facing, the financial abyss we're staring into, the difficulties with government making us compete for tiny pots of money and over-regulating what we do with them, the supposed ethos of levelling up in an era when we know moving has been designed out of our lives, but designed out of our lives on a very inequitable and unequal footing. And I think the sense that GM Moving can be, without calling it in any way a levelling up movement, it can be and has been, I think, for GM, a great leveller, really. It's a democratic movement. It is a movement of many organisations identifying and contributing to that cause, and it is ultimately a grassroots initiative. And I think it's far too common for governments to invent programmes of, behaviour change with metrics attached to them. What we've achieved, I think, through GM Moving is exactly that, but in a much more democratic, non-hierarchical, organic fashion, and that's absolutely the movement that we all want to continue to be part of. For my sins, I am a great fan of moving, full stop. I'm embarrassed to say that I think, I'm actually embarrassed with two of us, which is Liz and I. We, I think, are the only ones on your panel of esteemed leaders today not wearing trainers. Hayley did put in my briefing note that I was supposed to wear trainers today. I do. Hayley is not wearing trainers either. Shoes you can move in, shoes in my case with soles that need replacing, I have to say. But I am a fan of shoes with soles that have very limited flexibility, which are the ones I wear when I'm following Steve Pleasant around the Tour de Manche. I'm also a fan of various pairs of trainers, and although I'm not here, genuinely not here to do product placement for trainers manufacturers who are based in Cumbria, Those of you who would like to have a look at I can't resist these opportunities to advertise the fact, but if you're after followers on Strava, it's always a good way to kind of promote yourself in this respect. You'll see my retired trainers list on Strava, which is, genuinely the fact that I do enjoy most of my week not wearing a suit, and actually, football gags aside, because we shouldn't make them in these hallowed turfs, I am a Blues fan. Not the Blues from Manchester, I'll leave you to guess at that. Although I do live fairly close by in Ancoats, and I often run past the Etihad, which for me is the best reason possible to speed up, I have to say. Anyway, on to more serious matters. I'm delighted to be joined by a panel of genuinely not just esteemed experts this afternoon, but people who are committed to the cause. People who are here because they want to be part of the movement with us. People are here, I think, because they want to help to extend the movement. I'll briefly introduce them, and then what I'm going to do is just pose a couple of questions. We'll see where the conversation goes from there. It probably won't cover all of the territory that is in my absurdly Financial Times-sized A3 script that occurred when my LaserJet printer skills went wrong this morning. This is one of the benefits of COVID, is never using printers anymore, Don't know what I'm doing. Anyway, so in no particular order. Firstly, Paul Dennett, who is the City Mayor of Salford, may be known to some of you, certainly known to me. Also chair of the Greater Manchester Integrated Care Partnership, so a very important leader, as many of us are these days, within the new NHS system. Secondly, we've also got Warren Hepperleet, who is a very well-known figure in GM moving circles, but also in the new Greater Manchester ICS, and a senior exec director within the ICS. Warren is very welcome and has been part of the cause for many, many years. Liz Windsor-Welsh is also on the panel, whose shoes I have already drawn to your attention. Liz is an old friend from the VCSE, very importantly represented on the panel and in the room today, CEO of Action Together and a member of our exec in GM Moving. Andy King is here, the chair of GM Active and chief exec of Manchester Active, and a very important voice of leisure providers across Greater Manchester. We're also pleased to have Tracy on the panel, Tracy Power, from the Rugby League World Cup, amongst other things, to talk particularly about the importance of major sporting events in Greater Manchester and beyond. Justin Bloomley from Sport England also joins us on the panel. We're pleased to have you here, Justin, as well, to give the Sport England perspective and some of the national views, I think, on, dare I put words into your mouth, what is different, unique, brilliant, beautiful, wonderful, and something that other parts of the UK are trying to copy, we are led to believe. So Justin will verify that in just a minute for us, no pressure. Last but not least, Beth Sutcliffe, who is, I know, a wonderful member of the team within Greater Sport as well, part of Hayley's team and very much part of the cause. I'm going to start with Paul, if I can. I think you've all got a roving mic or two to pass around. Paul, perhaps you could just say a little bit to start off with about the importance of GM moving to you, the importance of the changes that you're very much at the apex of in terms of the Integrated Care Partnership and the new NHS system, and perhaps just your kind of reflections on what more we could do to keep the movement alive.
Thanks very much, Tom. Not easy questions there, but nevertheless, GM moving is really important to me for a whole host of reasons. I think we all know in this room that regular physical activity massively improves people's mental health and well-being and physical health as well. But thinking about Greater Manchester for a minute, we also know that 2/3 of the people that live in our city region want to actually get more active than they currently are at the moment. So there's a real demand, a latent demand, if you like, within the city region that we as local authorities, as the NHS, as partners, as the CBSE sector, really need to catalyse and harness if we're going to deliver for the people of this city region. The other reason why this agenda matters to me is we also know when we look at the demographics around moving, there are some groups of people who are less active within the city region. Women and girls, people from areas of higher levels of deprivation, older people, disabled people, and those also living with longer health conditions, ultimately. So actually thinking about those groups and how we design strategies that speak to them in terms of how we encourage more moving has to be a priority for us moving forward. Now, government in their infinite wisdom has decided that we should have a load of NHS reforms, and part of that has been the advent of integrated care systems. And one of the things we're tasked with at the moment here in Greater Manchester is bringing about a statutory 5-year plan to actually deliver on health and social care for the people of Greater Manchester. For me, GM moving and physical activity has to be at the heart of that agenda. And, you know, the agenda moving forward is not going to be a walk in the park. I have to be honest about that. We have some huge challenges within our NHS at the moment. Growing waiting lists, you know, people going on strike because of pay and terms and conditions, whole host of challenges with waiting lists. So those operational challenges sit at somewhat of a conflict with the broader agenda around the wider determinants of health and well-being. And GM moving is very much in that sphere of activity. Marmot City region, wider determinants of health and well-being needs to be incorporated ultimately in the strategy moving forward, but it is going to be a challenge. I think for me what's really interesting though about GM moving is it's a movement, and this is about people of their own volition coming together across a city region to genuinely prioritise physical activity. This isn't about a local authority providing services or the NHS providing services. This is non-hierarchical in many respects. And for me, it's about how do we harness what is a really successful organic movement and actually use it to target challenges we've got across the city region. I think moving forward, we've got to really take issues of inequalities and poverty seriously. You know, I know many people in my city are working 2 or 3 jobs. They've not got time to even think about physical activity, let alone the money in their pocket to buy the equipment or to pay for the gym membership or to do a whole host of other things. So for me, moving forward on this agenda, we've got to really be serious about how do we tackle inequalities and poverty in a way that enables people to engage with this agenda. And that points to, in my opinion, targeted resourcing. It points to how we sustain this movement, as well as taking differentiated approaches to certain cohorts and demographics of people. I think the other reason why this agenda is really important to me as well is it's a no-brainer in terms of how it will protect our much-loved National Health Service. We know the costs of physical inactivity result in 38% higher hospital bed days. They also result in 5.5% higher representations at general practice. So from a value for money point of view, from a protecting our NHS point of view, this agenda really, really matters. For me, it's really exciting to be here today. Often in local government, we don't do things like this. You know, we think about things in a very structured, hierarchical way. And I think we are genuinely doing things differently here in Greater Manchester. We're revolutionising, in some respects, how we think about the wider determinants of health and well-being and how we bring people on a journey with us sociologically. I'm also really passionate about the collectivism of moving. Often we can think about this as just something we do as individuals, but actually bringing people together and collectively moving in spaces, in places, is really, really important. The health and well-being that we generate from that is phenomenal. And then finally, I'll finish on this, Tom. The other thing we really need to think about is the environment and how the environment kind of supports this agenda. And when I talk about the environment, I think about the social environment, so people. I also think about the physical environment, so structures. And in the city of Salford, we've been delighted over recent years with all the walking and cycling infrastructure, the off-street walking and cycling infrastructure that we've installed across the city, and residents love it. But what we need to get better at is connecting this up and accelerating that across the whole of Greater Manchester. And then finally, there's also the environmental infrastructure. I know in my city, people who live in the more affluent, the greener part of the city, live on average 10 years longer than those who live in the more greyer urban parts of the city. So greening our city region and linking that with how we do placemaking sits at the heart of how we enable and how we engender more moving and more physical activity. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you, Paul. Thanks. And just as a brief footnote of clarification, the reference to most local government events being top-down, boring and hierarchical was nothing to do with the inner workings of Salford City Council, just as a quick disclaimer for you all there. Thanks, Paul. Warren, I'm going to move to you next. I mean, you've been involved, obviously, in GM Moving since the very beginning, very much part of taking charge in Greater Manchester and absolutely part of helping to embed that movement. Paul's referred to the impending work around the ICS strategy as well and how important that is in this moment. Do you want to just reflect for us a bit on that journey and what next with the ICS strategy in that regard?
Yeah, thanks, Tom. It's a kind of perfect moment, isn't it, to reflect on kind of two periods of change in Greater Manchester's story. Because as you say, we I think had an incredible opportunity on the back of health and social care devolution in 2015, and an incredible opportunity that doesn't often come through in the NHS, of almost being blessed with a blank sheet of paper and a big question about what does it take to maximise the health potential of a defined population, and then just be given the opportunity of connecting across a place like Greater Manchester and trying to find the contributors. And I do remember that moment when the contributors started to run towards us and say, we think we're part of the answer. And part of that was a belief that a kind of a balanced social medical model was possible, it was beneficial, and it might be key to the sustainability long-term of formal health and care services, as Paul's described. But I think at that time it was a belief, and it was something where the advocates and ambassadors were an unusual blend of people. I remember being described by a former chief exec as a hippie anarchist by encouraging this kind of thing. And there's a moment of kind of discomfort alongside the excitement. But as we kind of sit here now in 2023, 6-7 years further on, and being partway through a process of coming up with our next 5-year strategy for the health of the population in Greater Manchester with Paul and colleagues on the Integrated Care Partnership. If we look back now, we've got completely different material to use. We're not reliant just on optimism and hope, because actually we've generated some evidence to confirm that this must be part of it. So actually our kind of rampant optimism in 2015 of a rebalanced social medical model looks like it's been reinforced. Colleagues may have seen that there was a publication in the Lancet late last year that looked at the effects on life expectancy of what we did pre-pandemic in Greater Manchester and saw a differential effect. The decline in life expectancy nationally, that was seen nationally in comparable areas, was protected in Greater Manchester for the first 2 years. And then we saw an accelerated effect in the compared increase in life expectancy over the second 2 years. And what we'd seen was actually some very different metrics around reducing inactivity across Greater Manchester compared with other active partnerships across the country, and a faster recovery. So part of what we've built and what sits in that set of relationships that are part of the movement look like they work. And very often we're encouraged to follow the evidence. And actually, I'm really glad that for this instance, we decided not to follow the evidence, but to create the evidence. Now we've got the opportunity for the second 5-year strategy to follow it. And I think that's where we go now, with a degree more self-confidence behind us.
Warren, thanks. That's brilliant. And I think that sense that the movement has to be part of that strategy for the future, I think, is a really important message for us all. It's an important commitment, but something we all want to be all want to be part of. Liz, I'm going to come to you next, if that's okay. I mean, again, you've been involved in GM Moving for some time. VCSE contribution and significance has been really, really important to the movement, but I think that's gone both ways. It's not just the VCSE has been important to GM Moving, but the movement has been important to the community and grassroots connection. So do you want to just reflect a bit on that journey and how important those ownership issues in the community are for the future?
Absolutely. When I look back at the 6 years, I remember us talking in rooms like this really about the importance of asset-based community development and thinking about strength-based working, focusing on what's strong and what you can build from. And although I see that that's really important, I also think and notice a step change that we need to collectively own, and I certainly see it within the movement across the voluntary sectors, is that communities want to lead. There is real potential, there's real strength in what people and communities do, and there is a space now for us to really think about how do we shift the power, how do we shift the resources in order that that leadership can really flourish. And I think that's a great opportunity for the movement around GM Moving to really focus on as we think about our next steps. Because I think some of the challenges really, and it was great. I don't know if Nazrine's still in the room today from this morning, but she came on and she was talking about the panel that she's on in relation to tackling inequity. And what strikes me about that, and what strikes me about some of the other examples we may have used at the last conference, I don't know if you remember talking about Majid, who is a key partner within the Goddock area of Oldham. And these are people that we as the voluntary sector, and certainly through local infrastructure, which is the kind of organisations I'm from, we work with those people day in, day out. And what doesn't change is their commitment to their place, their generations of family, their social ties, the long-term ambitions they have for the places that they live in and call home, and the people they call neighbours and their friends and their family. That doesn't really change. Structures change, programmes change, funding changes, initiative changes, but those things don't change. So when we think about the future of integrating work in places, we need to think about how do we integrate with them, because if they have the answers, if they are part of the solution, then we need to shift in order that we can really invest in their capabilities to do this leadership. It's really hard to do. There's massive blockers in the way. I'm not suggesting for a second that there's a magic answer to that. But if we never try, and we never try and do it at scale and meaningfully, with the same kind of power that you can see in the room today, with our collective movements and our collective assets, then I'm not sure that we'll have really given it a good job. So for me, that's the opportunity for us to look forward, and obviously the voluntary sector, because that's the way that people organise themselves already in places. That's something, we want to be a big part of that. We think we've got lots to offer.
Absolutely. Yeah. And I think Liz, that sense that the VCSE in all its shapes and guises, big to small organisations, individuals to groups to formal charities, and much, much more, is here for the duration, is massively important to this, massively important part of the movement. Andy, tell us about how things are in the in the leisure sector for providers. We've got lots of challenge, whether it's within the customer base, whether it's with your own operating costs and so on. But you've been key to the journey, and you're clearly key to the delivery for the long run. So talk to us a bit about what that involves from your perspective.
Yeah, thanks, Tom. Again, in terms of to be on this panel, to be honest with you, is amazing. And again, in GM, to be included in some of these discussions and to be in a room with health. I know lots of my colleagues around the country would give their left arm to be included in some of these conversations. So very briefly, the pivot to active wellbeing that we're working on. GM Active is a collaboration of 12 operators across the 10 boroughs of Greater Manchester. We came together years ago because of devolution and the vague idea that there must be something in that we can do to improve population health. When COVID hit and we were all closed like everybody else, we did an appeal basically to the 10 chief executives of across GM to say, look, we're really important and we've got a real desire to improve, to work with partners across the system to improve population health. Please support us. I won't bore you with what happened since. And then obviously we're now on to the latest crisis, which is the energy crisis, and that's making us all very nervous about what the future holds. So again, I guess the crisis changes, but the mission doesn't. We are still absolutely committed to doing what we can to use our assets, which is our people and our facilities and our connections, basically, working with the likes of Hayley and Greater Sport and GM Moving to make a real difference to population health. That's our passion, our mission, our purpose that drives us. And that's got people connected to us and to the point of they're now investing. So all 10 of the local authorities have decided to invest in GM Active. So have Sport England, so have the public health commissioners across GM. So we've got a real system approach to what happens next. And this is what we call, based on a lot of the work from Uniting the Movement, from Sport England, and more recently, the future of leisure. So we're now working incredibly hard to look at a few key themes. One of them is our facilities, sustainable facilities, probably a rationalisation of facilities, changing them to be community wellbeing hubs. What's that actually mean? Lots of people talk about it. What's the practicalities of that? How do we integrate those facilities into the wider landscape? Do what Liz is saying. How do they then work with communities in place? Second on that, and that's a real quick praising. Equally, the workforce development, we created just before COVID a GM Active College, because that video you saw at the start is our flagship program, call it a program, a movement almost, of Pre-Out for Cancer. We are commissioned to deliver that through all 10 authorities, all 99 of our facilities across GM. Currently catering for approximately 1,500 patients a year. We're working now with GM Cancer and our colleagues at the Christie and whatnot to go from Pre-Out for Cancer to Prehab for all. And the ambition from them is 20,000 patients a year that will go through our system. But we need some more staff to deliver that. So we started the college. That has now gone on. We've also realised that if we're going to work across the system and work and change from leisure to improving population health, we need to learn a bit. So we've created our very own, with lots of help from across the system, our Transformational Leaders program, which is now, I think we're down to 40 of our managers that have gone through. And this is to get them to think differently and to understand they're part of a system, whether they know it or not, and actually then think, how do I do things differently, practically, to make sure we're improving population health in my area, using my facilities. We are not on the bandwagon of saying that everything needs to be, all the facilities need to be kept no matter what. We're very much about getting into the communities, working with the voluntary sector and other partners. And so we're taking another approach as part of our pivot to active wellbeing to say, are the facilities in the right place? We're looking across the region. Are they fit for purpose? Do we need all of them? Can they be repurposed? Can we work across boundaries better? And actually, what outreach programs, which I hate that term, but what outreach programs should we be doing, maybe instead of some of the facilities? And more things to do on that side of things. And last but not least, Tom, I'll finish now. We're also working with Salford University to discover the next Prehab for Cancer, in short. There's loads and loads of fantastic things that all 12 of the operators do across GM, and I know there's plenty elsewhere as well. We're working with Salford University to capture which of those programs could be scaled up, again, to improve population health across GM and beyond, and go from there.
Brilliant, thanks, Andy. Obviously one of the really important aspects of sports participation is not just what the providers do, but it's the advertisement of how transformational sports participation, competitive or otherwise, can be. So I'm going to go to Tracy now with that question in mind, as the social impact director from the Rugby League World Cup. And we obviously had the Rugby League World Cup, we had the Women's Euros, many of us were part and parcel of that. It was just as hard for me to go to games at Old Trafford, but I bit my lip and got in the door nevertheless. Tracy, tell us a bit more about how important those things are to I suppose, spurring the movement that we're talking about in GM? And what's one of the things you're most proud of, perhaps, about how the Rugby League World Cup has contributed to that movement?
Yeah, I think 2022, what a year of sport, particularly in England, Commonwealth Games, Women's Euros, Rugby League World Cup, Gymnastics World Championships in Liverpool, and many more. And I think what we've seen over the last few years is that major sporting events being much more focused on what happens off the field as what happens on the field, and how those major sporting events can have a much wider impact on local communities, not just on economic impact, but a much wider social impact as well. And certainly at Rugby League World Cup, we set out 5 years ago to be a tournament with a purpose, and that purpose was to make a positive difference to people's lives and communities. And I'm really proud, as is everyone that's involved in the tournament, to know that we absolutely delivered that last year, which is for us just as important as the number of people that went to watch, the broadcast viewers, all those the stats that you expect from major events. We're just as thrilled and proud as the difference we've made in local communities. And I think we've seen, again, over the last few years, that major sporting events can drive inclusion, they can drive community engagement, physical activity. Look at the Women's Euros and the increase in the interest from women and girls wanting to get involved in football on the back of that tournament. The growth in participation for women and girls football has just been massive over the last 6 months, and hopefully that will continue to grow. So when we talk about inspiring a nation and inspiring the next generation to get active, what a fantastic example we've got right there. And I think as well, it's around providing opportunity. Major events open a lot of doors. Major sporting events allow you to provide opportunities. We took that, we've provided opportunities, and the partners and communities and people that we've worked with have grasped those opportunities and really thrived from them. So a great example that we have from our work is Shevington Rugby League and Football Club in Wigan. So through the World Cup, the Rugby League World Cup, and funding from the Football Foundation, we were able to invest in a new facility for them. Both clubs were homeless, didn't have a base. They've now got a brand new clubhouse. So 4 years ago, they've gone from having nothing to now having their own facility that they can call home. And that facility is not just for rugby league and football. They've really made that into a community wellbeing hub and focusing on how does that facility benefit their local community and their local neighbourhood. And yes, they're running rugby league, yes, they're running football, providing a better environment for people to get involved and be active in those sports and allowing more people to get involved. But they're also running walking groups. So the local communities come and use that as a base and go out and be physically active in a different way. They're running groups and meetings and activities for people to try and tackle isolation and loneliness in their communities. It was highlighted as an issue in their local neighbourhood. They're opening their doors and allowing people who are homeless to access showers and washing facilities. They're running first aid training, and they've got a defib on the facility, and they've trained up local community members on how to use that should it be needed. I think all those things, those wider benefits that them having that facility is allowing them to deliver and allowing them to meet the local needs of that local community, getting more people active, but having that wider health impact as well. And yes, would they have got there? Yes, they probably, they were working hard to fundraise. Would they have got there eventually? Yes, but, we were able to put some money on the table that unlocked other funding for them, that allowed them to build that facility. And as I say, it's about, we were able to provide the opportunity. They've got the right people around the table, have the right support locally, and grasp that opportunity and really thrive from it. And I think for me, that's what sport can do. I think we can do much more with sports clubs. I think there's lots of sports clubs up and down the country that are doing an awful lot of great work wider than just delivering the sports that they deliver and that they run. And it's around how can we better support them to do that? How do we invest in them? How do we support them to do that, to do more of that, making sure they're linked up with the right people, the right partners in their local communities, and that they're really embedded into that network and into that system rather than just doing it as a standalone.
Brilliant, Tracy. Thank you for that. And I do think that message about the power of those major events, not just to generate grassroots engagement, but to build the momentum for investment in facilities, and that Shevington example and others you gave is really great evidence of that. Justine, I trailed your contribution earlier, of course, in terms of what you're kind of confirm about how GM is viewed by the world. But seriously, I understand from Hayley and others that it's the people side of this that is absolutely the biggest kind of priority and asset that you think of in the system. So do you want to tell us a bit about that? And, I think genuinely colleagues in the room would be interested in the Sport England perspective on the movement here in Greater Manchester.
Thank you. I think the people, and it's actually been a theme as I've been listening to all the answers here, that people are key in all of this. And it has been fantastic to just be in this room and step out of the work for a day and just see and feel the energy and the excitement and the will to want to drive the movement, to grow the movement, to spread the movement. And the fact that we could have filled this room twice over and some, I think says an enormous amount about the people in the room, but the people who are not in the room as well, that Liz refers to, that are working in communities, in localities that are doing the work on a day-to-day basis. So we talk about system change, place-based working at Sport England. We talk about whole system change, and sometimes those things are quite sort of almost a bit alien and a bit difficult for people to kind of interact with. And for me, I think what I've realised over the period of time that we've been doing this work through the local delivery pilot and beyond in terms of GM moving in Greater Manchester is that it's about all of you, it's about all of us, it's about the people that are involved in the work, and it's about the relationships between us all. One of the things that was really exciting for me was when I saw the delegate list and saw where all of you were from, and the fact that we have got the system in the room. So that is a real testimony to the journey that we've been on, because 5-6 years ago, when we had a conference like this, it was a very, very different makeup of people in the room. Some of you are still here, and some of you have stayed on the journey, but what we've done is we've added to that. And we talk often, Hayley often reminds me of spark plug people, and spark plug people are all of you in the room again. And I guess the real sort of thing about this for me is that you are all spark plugs that can spark other people to become more involved in this. So I guess one of my reflections often is that it feels sometimes quite fragile. The systemic change piece feels quite fragile. We are doing, and you can feel that there are some really positive, strong things happening in Greater Manchester and across the system, but we know that that is fragile. But the change that is made is by you as people, and we need to keep investing in that. And I know that through Claire's work, through the leadership development programme and all that goes with that, there is a real invitation for more and more people to become part of that. And that is really exciting. In terms of the point you asked about, Tom, in terms of Sport England, I think Tim Hollingsworth, our chief exec, always describes Greater Manchester as the pilot of the pilots at the front. I think what I would reflect on is that if we don't move the rest of the country on in a similar vein, it is really hard for you to be able to keep going. So from a Sport England point of view, yes, we see something really exciting here. And as we move forward now to look at what we're describing as place expansion and look at more places to work in, Greater Manchester provides us not only with a context to deepen the work that you have been doing for the last 5, 6, 7 years or so, but also a great context for everyone else to learn from, to engage with, and to be part of spreading and growing a movement that is bigger and wider. So, yes.
Brilliant.
Fantastic.
Justine, thank you for that contribution. And I like the pilot of the pilots analogy, really, but I think for GM, what we don't want to be doing is just sitting back and taking genuinely the glory and the accolades for that. I think the sense of the movement being something that is replicable in other areas of the country is a really important one. So sharing that learning, really, really important. And also, I guess, notwithstanding the energy price crisis, plug in your spark plugs and keep them plugged in, folks, because that's what keeps the whole thing alive. Last but not least, Beth, you've been obviously involved in GM Moving for a number of years. I know you've got a key role in health integration. You might want to reflect a little bit on that while you've got Warren next to you, although you're, I know, preaching to the converted. But tell us a bit about your reflections on that period with GM Moving, and I suppose how important telling our story is to the success of the next phase, Beth.
First, I'll just say I got handed a post-it note before. I thought it was going to ask to be a duet, me and you doing a karaoke song. It was a question.
Oh, go on, do it.
It was an ask if there's going to be questions and answer afterwards, so I just raised that. Said I'd ask it. Yeah.
I will. Yep. Sorry. Go on. Yeah.
No, it's just that I'm being involved.
Do you want a microphone? So.
Sorry. One day I went to this conference and I was the only black person. I said, are you sure, this is my joke, mind you, are you sure this is not a KKK? And they said, no, they don't exist in the UK, it's only America. So if you were in America, you would be, you'd be worried. But I do put a disclaimer what I'm going to ask. And it's not to be critical at all, but I am going to be a critical friend in a way, because if we are going to improve services across Greater Manchester, we need to hear all sides of the coin. Now, today, I was downstairs about co-production, and I said, co-production is just a fad. It's just another coined word, and 10 years from now, we are going to come across another word as well. But I was just talking in jest. What I meant was that we are always coming up with all these new ideas and so on, and do they really translate into good services for the people? Because when I see here, I mean, Manchester is one of the most diversified, or Greater Manchester rather, is a very diversified community. And most of it came through the Industrial Revolution when the South Asian came to Greater Manchester. But it really makes me sad that who are we having these services for? Who are we targeting these services for, right? And one of the things I'm involved in Sporting Equals, I don't know whether you may know about it, and one of the things they want to do is try to get diversity on national boards like Sport England, FA, and so on. Now, if we are going to get people active in the community, we need to start at the top, definitely. I know you are talking about bottom going up, but to me, I think it's, going at the top. And I'm asking everybody, we had the same thing in Bolton last year, where they introduced the Great Museum. By the way, I'm a community champion in Bolton, and I've done a lot of work in the community, all communities as well, and so on. So so that's what I want to do. That to me, it worries me that there are only a section of people in Greater Manchester who are receiving or hearing this message. How do I take this message across to all communities? Thank you.
Okay. Thanks. And I think all I can say in a nutshell is we absolutely take that challenge on the chin. And I think in terms of the sense of GM Moving being a movement that is for the whole of the GM community and something that is, I think, demonstrably bottom up rather than just top down. There is good previous on that, but it is absolutely a work in progress, and we have to be here in exactly the same way as, I know the diversity of the Bolton community well. It's a similar issue we've got in Salford. It's a similar issue we've got in Manchester and Oldham, and particularly other parts of East Manchester. That is absolutely a work in progress and got to be part of the next phase. But I think perhaps when I ask colleagues to wrap up in a second, we can reflect on that inclusion aspect, which has been, I know, part of the workshops we've had discussions on this morning, and definitely needs to be there as a commitment for the next stage. Beth, back to you. Reflections on the journey so far? By all means, some reflections on that issue as well.
I suppose a reflection of the journey over the last kind of 4 or 5 years that I've been at Greater Sport is just today's kind of just represents the shift of content in terms of the language we use, the discussions we're having, and the kind of maturity of relationships and understanding we've got. And I suppose there's two things that come to mind there around the clarity of the understanding of why moving matters. So it is about physical health, it is about mental health, but it's also about how we create a greener, more prosperous, more fairer Greater Manchester as well. And that sounds obvious, but that wasn't necessarily talked about in the same kind of passion and understanding and evidence base that we are able to talk about now. So I think that's the first thing to reflect on. And then secondly, just it's been mentioned before, but the people who are in the room, that understanding of everyone's got a role to play, so that if we're going to take a true kind of whole system approach to increasing physical activity, we need to recognise that it's everyone's responsibility and everyone can have an impact. So if you're a GP or you're working in the health sector, you can have an influence, but if you're working for Transport for Greater Manchester and planning and all these different places, every little bit of the jigsaw needs to be thought about to genuinely make a difference to everyone's lives if we're going to create active lives for all. And again, it might sound obvious, but that recognition and clarity and shift and genuine kind of understanding, I think, is incredibly powerful to build the movement. And I think that's what we've seen today is the energy of the GM moving movement. And if we're going to do that, we need to take that responsibility, each of us, to go into the rooms that we have influence, the communities that we work, to make that difference and keep this energy going and keep the movement going and sustain the movement. And I think that's the power of this GM moving movement.
Absolutely, the GM moving movement. Beth, well done. And just as a final thought, Beth, if we were here, possibly not in the Etihad, but if we were together in 5 years' time, what's the one thing you really hope that kind of next 5-year journey would have achieved for GM moving?
We'll be at Old Trafford for one, obviously. I think to your point, I think the diversity.
Bolton Wanderers, there you go.
Bolton Wanderers, maybe. I think to that point of diversity in the room and making sure that has progressed and is representing Greater Manchester and holding ourselves to account for that. But I think there's also the role of us to tell the story, because we are working with every community in Greater Manchester on the physical activity agenda, and we need to share the stories of impact on that. And we had a few stories this morning with Davine and around the kind of Together Fund, but we've got hundreds of those stories. So how do we use the power of those stories, backed up by evidence and data that we've got, to show the impact of the work and the approaches and the ways of working we know and making an impact to people's lives? How do we keep telling those stories?
Great commitment. I'm going to cheekily run down the panel very quickly and just ask you all the same question. So 5 years hence, Warren, what will be the one thing for you?
All right. Well, whilst we're trading football stadiums, I'm going to put in a bid for Broadhurst Park in Moston, if that's all right.
We're going places.
Thank you. So I think I'm going to pick up a bit of a prompt from Justine, I think, in 5 years' time, because I was really struck by that idea of, the potential, the loneliness and the risk of being the pilot of the pilots. Because if in 5 years' time, it would be amazing if actually what we've described today and what we've reflected over the last 4 or 5 years was routine across the country, and it was a bit more than routine. It had actually started to unlock and lead to a different kind of distribution of power and resource across the country, an entirely kind of different deal on devolution that actually starts to understand that approaches that are actually not just about co-production, but actually community-led, are where some of the answers to the wicked issues and societal challenges that we face are. So I think that kind of fundamental shift in the power and structure of the country might be quite nice in 5 years' time, if we're allowed to say that.
Brilliant, but definitely, I think spread the love, spread the movement is a key thing in that. Tracy, 5 years hence, you'll be back, won't you?
more diversity in the room, not just in terms of the people, but I think organisations as well. So having more different types of organisations from different industries, from different sectors in this room, all talking about the same thing, I think for me would be a big thing. I was talking to someone at lunch who said that this morning you asked around how many people were from health were in the room, and a few hands went up. I think it was comment that 5 years ago there'd have probably been no hands go up. Yes, we've made progress, but this in 5 years' time, can half the room be involved in health, and can we have other sectors as well, just from environmental sustainability, transport, and they're having that much more diverse workforce and people involved in helping to unite the movement.
Great. Paul?
So for me, I think it's getting some of the groups that are less active. So I did read off a list of those: women and girls, people from deprived communities, older people, disabled people, and those with long-term health conditions. I think that will be a great achievement for GM Moving. But importantly, I think for me, the biggie is ensuring that those that don't necessarily have time, money, resources, access, equipment, can actually properly engage with this agenda, and that there are no barriers to entry across the whole of Greater Manchester. And we absolutely do need to Equality Act proof this agenda and speak to all of the protected characteristics in the Equalities Act in terms of how we operationalise this. Thanks.
Great. Thanks, Paul. Justine, your thoughts?
I'm going to say all of that, but I'm going to pick up, I think, on the point that Cordell made this morning around equity, and I think that that is really important. This isn't just about equality, it is about equity, and I think there is a real key thing for me that I would like to be able to, when I come into Greater Manchester, because I live over the border in Lancashire, dare I say that it is really obvious that there is a movement for movement, that people find it easy to be physically active, and that has to be for everybody. It shouldn't just be for us in this room. That has to be everybody's opportunity.
Brilliant. Thanks, Justine. And well done for not offering up Preston North End as the next venue as well. Liz, your thoughts?
I want us to be quite bold in the next 5 years. I want us to recognise the individual examples of the work that community organisations and groups do, but I want us to move the conversation on to how do we structurally recognise and lock that into our system solutions? How do we invest meaningfully in the social infrastructure that people need in order to do that, so that they're not running around in lots of different agendas, in lots of different spaces, having the same conversations, that those people rooted in place are having conversations with you all about all the things that are important to you, but really what's important to them, and how do we lock in the investment at a meaningful scale to really strengthen that, so those people can lead, so that when they lead, they then own things, and they have a pathway through, from economic deprivation into kind of hope and aspiration, and a place where they can, own their own destiny in their active life and their, overall life chances. And that's what I want to see in the next 5 years. And it's a bit of a challenge. I know that's my job, but I want us to have a good go at that within this movement.
Brilliant. But it is a leveller with a big opportunity. Andy. Andy, go on.
Right, really briefly, first and foremost, I'd really love to see nationally that leisure disappears, that we just forget about leisure and we become wellbeing, wellness. And also that we would sit, not in a DCMS to be honest with you, but we'd sit in health, and we'd sit in health because what we've done in Greater Manchester has grown legs, and we've influenced elsewhere, worked with partners, and actually we are then recognised as an essential service for the health and wellbeing in the nation, and not just a nice to have, which leisure is the connotation. So quite bold too.
Brilliant. Thank you. I apologise, we've run kind of grossly over time. We kind of warned one another this might happen once we got going. I just want to say massive thanks to the contributors, Beth, Warren, Tracy, Paul, Justine, Liz and Andy. Particular thanks to Hayley, to Eve, the whole team who've helped to organise this, given us a bit of a platform. I think from me, a bigger, better movement that's still here doing all of the things we do, but on a bigger, better scale. I do think the point about contemplating braver areas of intervention to support participation, I won't go on now, but see me afterwards if you want to talk about ideas on that. I think that has to be part of the next 5-year journey, and absolutely in a bigger, more diversified grassroots movement, which is what we're all about. The goal in 5 years' time cannot just be to have a few more Strava followers but thanks for those who've done it while I've been checking my phone. Look up the trainers. Thank you all very much. Well done. Speak soon.
Fantastic. So, stretch. That was an invitation from Hayley there. The people need a stretch for your last 15 minutes. So we're going to shift power and ownership and representation and where services are. All in? Excellent. So our last 15 minutes, we're about to do a bit of a wrap up. Before that, we've got one more story. So we talk a lot about the connections between being active and our physical health, but we've heard today as well how important it is for our mental health and for that boost. So this is Chloe's story. No, it's not. Chloe's story's gone. Don't worry, we'll move on. No, move on, says Andrew. Fine, okay. So what we're going to do, what we've learnt as part of GM Moving is it's not just about listening and actively listening, which we talked a lot about today. It's also about how then we reflect on what we've heard and we sense make about what we've heard. And then we take collective leadership to put it into action. So for this last 15 minutes, we've got a number of people who've been our keynote listeners. So they've been here all day, really tuning in to think about what are some of the key messages that are coming out that we can really take away with us and really stick. So we make sure that we don't just leave today infused and tomorrow, but when we go into work on Monday, these things have stuck with us and we embed them and bake them into our work. So first of all, I'm going to have Nikki Hawkins. So Nikki is a framing expert to share some of the key messages she's heard over the course of today. Do you want a mic or do you want?
Hi everyone.
Oh,
shall I just come there?
Go on now, go on.
We've done so well on tech all day.
Hi everyone. So I have heard so much that has been music to my ears as somebody who thinks almost every waking moment about narratives and framing and how we talk about things. I've heard about some really amazing framing and narrative shifts that have either happened or are happening. So I'm just going to run through the shifts that I think have taken place or are starting to take place. I think that this movement has gone from talking about and thinking about how inactivity is bad to talking about how moving is brilliant. I think that it's gone from being a message which is more kind of like take your medicine, eat your greens, do the hard thing, to actually join in the joy. I think that there has been a big shift, and there is a shift moving away from guilt, shame and blame to understanding, listening and inviting. I think there's been a shift from this is not for me to this is for all of us. And if I had to reflect on something that I think needs more work and needs more from all of us to sort of dig deep and engage in a big shift around this, I think that we need to do more to move away from a story that is telling people to move more and just saying move more, however we dress that up, but a message of move more, to a message which is all about making moving possible. Because the reality is that nobody, if they get more active, does it entirely by themselves or off their own bat. There is always something and someone and something structural or something out there that's beyond that person's control that has happened and is happening to make that movement possible. And we need to be talking more about that. So when we moved this morning, it was the Daves that got us moving. We wouldn't have done that if they hadn't invited us to join them. And if we had, we would have felt really weird, just kind of standing up by ourselves. Lisa talked about her dad building her a hurdle. You know, it took that help, that support, that thing that shifted that was outside of what she could do. So I cycle a lot, but to my shame, I don't think I would be able to keep on cycling if my partner didn't pump up my tyres, because I can't do it myself. It always takes something outside of the individual, and that's what I think we need to do more, is to show those factors and those things that enable us and allow us to move and to experience the joy, but to do it together and to help each other to do it.
Thank you, Nikki. Malcolm, I'm coming to you next, wherever you are. So Malcolm has been in the hub downstairs, where he's getting lots of people to think about challenges, and he's going to share some of those challenges we've heard and how they relate to this agenda.
We've been taking everyday challenges and then kind of looking at how they kind of connect into the enablers around the strategy and around the movement. So I'm just going to read them out as a list. Asset equality training, workforce and exploitation, tackling inequality, seek the change. Growth in the area at the moment, life. Coming up against obstacle moulding instead of breaking, losing confidence in my abilities, needing help. Bureaucracy getting in the way of action, changing organisation perception, keeping an eye on conflicting priorities, making choices for the long run. Reducing male suicide rates. Motivation by workers to overcome barriers to belong, completing my first triathlon. Stuck peering over a wall, how do I get there? Blank brain. Finding time to do some printing, travel with my family in a camper around Europe, more active meetings. Failure, fear of failure, of lots of things to do to align for success. When working with communities, you need to be resilient and spring back when programs aren't working as you imagine. Please turn over. Focus, reposition and go again by Eddie. A trip to the gym today. Audience. End of day. Done it. The JD conundrum. LTGB plus young people's sense of belonging in active spaces. Connecting socially isolated older adults to activities in neighbourhoods. Deciding on direction in an ever-changing landscape of the community, being able to work together in a large group and develop ideas, being able to cycle more, young carers being resilient building and locks, keeping an eye, wanting to throw the dice, increasing activity levels of disadvantage, the future, reconnecting with Manchester, how to make co-production fly, plugging the hole in the donut, time, youth social prescribing, funding, community safety in numbers, importance of opportunities to be active with others, run a marathon, recruit new players, using sustainable travel with 3 children, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, exclamation mark, sustainable and consistent for all the community, connection to nature and city living, create more habitat and balance, making accessible the importance of rotating cones at crossings, overcoming barriers to activity, getting young people involved in communities, more recycled bikes on sale, pedestrian access at sports centres, that needs funding. I miss you, Al.
So that's just some of the challenges we all brought into this space today. And not to say that this is a space that we can fix them, but it shows how relevant all those things are to this agenda. And when we think about that pitch at the beginning, sometimes that feels like we've been pulled in all directions, but actually what we've heard is there's some real commonalities around the things that matter and the things we need to do, and a way that we can address those together. So I've got Ella, who is our resident poet, who has also been capturing what she's heard over the course of the day. Come up, Ella.
Thank you. Yeah, so I've been making notes and listening to people to help me write this poem this afternoon, mainly the last hour, really. And here it is. This is a movement for the seldom heard voices, of letting go of the preconceived notions of what they're like, what they should do, how it should work, what we think is true. How many of us walk into a room without considering the stories of movement passing through, patterns imbuing, memories brewing. These stories are the foundations of a city, vibrant and true. This is a movement for young people who are experts in their own experience, who refuse to watch their stories simply passed from hand to hand, who know that their ideas have weight to grow and to expand. This is a movement for communities who face the sharpest blades of oppression. Everybody has a body and a right to move. The barriers to hurdle and the points to prove are what keep folks isolated, separate from the whole. But it's deep listening and action that can feed the active souls. This is a movement for the men who can only talk as they walk, side by side, not catching eyes, through the wild peaks or on their sullen streets, bringing lightness to each other's lives each time they meet. Human bodies move with meaning, so even those who hide under stoic brows find there is love and connection and deep meaning to be found in a windswept walk, under a summer sun or wide grey skies. It's the momentum in these moments that allow us to rise. This is a movement for the movers and the shakers. You already know the simple joy, that the body is a gift. You felt your blood rush like a river as it turns and roars and shifts. It is your willingness and courage when you embrace communities. It is the knowing that in failure we learn, we move, we seek. This is a movement for a city where to move is not yet free. The work of giving people what they need is bold in its simplicity. It is justice, imagination, and it feeds the active souls. It breathes life into a people who have movement at their core. So the way we work and meet and move and wheel and ride and run and play can be embedded in the foundations of our simple everyday. Thank you.
Anyone else got goosebumps? That was phenomenal. It's a bit hard to say anything after that, really. So I'm going to say, Lisa, follow that. For those of you in the room that don't want to leave without feeling like, oh, action, what does it mean? Lisa is a woman of action. So I'm going to leave her to say a couple of sections on what she's heard.
How do I follow that is what I'm going to say. I can honestly say that this morning was the best start to a conference that I have ever been to. Justine, you're going to get a message say, can the 2 days come to our away day at the end of this month, please? Because they're just awesome, brilliant. We have heard huge amounts today, and I'm sure that your mind is buzzing with ideas, new connections and thoughts. So what? So what? My takeaway is the fact that we can be more effective with the relationships and the partnerships that we have. It's so clear that here in Greater Manchester, these relationships are here. You're doing things differently. But also take a minute to think about who's not in this room. We are preaching to the converted here today. So who is not in this room that we need to get to? How can you unlock more of these relationships to deliver more? How can you change what you do to make more of a difference to people's lives? Our shared vision is apparent and our joint desire to ensure people have the opportunity to move. But we need to be bold, we need to be innovative, and we need to drive forward across a number of areas. We've heard it today, active travel, climate, access, communities, health. We listened to Cordell this morning really talking about the challenges that we have, and we know that physical activity is that magic pill. Uniting the Movement has at its heart, we can only do this together. Good collaboration, after all, is a good contact sport. The change is happening, but our job is absolutely not done. So back to my so what. What are you going to do when you leave this room today? What are you going to do differently? Who are you going to pick up the phone to? How are you going to hardwire physical activity into every single thing we do? That is my ask of you today, to think about that, because together we will continue on this journey to change, and genuinely we will unite this movement. Thank you.
We've also had the brilliant Annie at the back as our visual recorder. So I do invite you to go and have a look as you pass by. She's done a fantastic job of capturing, again, lots of the things that we've heard today. So it just leaves me now to say thank you. Like such a massive, heartfelt thank you. Thank you to everyone who's come up and who's spoken truths, who's spoken the honesty that has come and with such authenticity throughout today. Thank you to everyone who's facilitated a phenomenal array of breakout sessions. There were people and partners from across the whole system and across other parts of the country who've come and helped support those sessions. And thank you to everyone who has then listened and is going to take those stories and take them on. Thank you for our tech team at the back. Woo! To everyone who's tuned in and has followed the live stream from a distance and has persevered on tech. To the brilliant Zebra Partnership, who've also been capturing Vox Pops outside. We've got lots of snippets that we can share. And thank you to all of you for being absolutely wonderful, active participants in the whole of today. It's been an absolute joy, it really has, and let's continue in that vein. That's a wrap. The bar is open for an hour. When we asked why you were coming, the key thing was to connect. So please do stay, enjoy, you've got an hour. If you really want a photograph, now is the time. You're allowed to go out there and take a selfie in the stadium. But please talk to each other, feel free to grab a drink, and see you on the journey.